Your reaction to this first hurdle being passed by the European Parliament?
Well, it's really a day of celebration from the perspective of human rights. There are many of us in civil society, in various NGOs, working to protect people from the most harmful uses of technology. And today we've had a huge endorsement from the European Parliament, one of the three legislative institutes of the EU, saying that they are willing to draw red lines in the sand against the most unacceptably harmful uses of AI systems. So there are also things that could be improved further, but nevertheless, there's a lot to be very happy about today.
Yeah, one of the issues going into the day was facial recognition. There was an amendment put forth by the center-right bloc to allow exceptions for police. That was rejected, though. It could, though, make its way back onto the table when there's arbitration with the member states and the Commission.
Yes, well, facial recognition and whether or not to ban it has been one of the most controversial topics in the negotiations on this EU AI Act so far. And over the last year and a half, we have seen parliamentarians working really hard to find a compromise between all seven of the political groups. And that was something they were able to achieve. And what they decided was that all live facial recognition and other biometric profiling needs to be banned without exception in public spaces, and that there also needs to be really strict limits on retrospective uses, as well as many other forms of profiling, tracking, and other systems that are often connected to facial recognition, which have all been linked to really egregious human rights abuses around the world.
So
But in just
what
the
do you
last
on that point? What do you answer to say the French government, which says we need that facial recognition for the Olympics next year to keep visitors safe?
It's very similar to what I said to MEPs in this pushback that we saw from the centre right that you mentioned, which is that there is absolutely no evidence that the use of these essentially mass surveillance technologies in public spaces do keep us safer. When we hear those claims, they're only ever coming from private companies or from governments without evidence being put forward that we are safer. And in fact, a huge amount of evidence to the contrary, that we are all less safe when our behaviors, our faces, and our bodies are being surveilled and profiled as we try to move around public spaces, whether that's sports venues, festivals, going to a protest, going to the doctors or a bar, or even a religious venue. And these are all real examples that I've just listed that have come from the EU in the last 3 years. And so we have really tangible evidence of people's human rights being harmed, not just in the EU, but around the world, and no evidence of effectiveness. So we do not believe that people should be treated as lab rats in experimental government pilots based on claims from companies that this is going to keep us safer.
There's also so-called predictive policing. Can you explain for our viewers what predictive policing is?
Predictive policing refers to a wide range of different techniques, some more low tech, using even things like spreadsheets, for example, all the way through to algorithmic predictions that we might think of more commonly as artificial intelligence, but that are used to try to predict whether somebody might be about to commit a crime or whether they might be likely to recommit a crime, which we call recidivism. And essentially, what these systems claim to do is to be able to tell the future. They say that they know, often based on incredibly discriminatory, historically biased information, for example, where people live, who they associate with, the school they went to, all sorts of sensitive data about their lives used to try to say whether or not they are going to commit a crime. And when you think about the fact that the EU has a human right to the presumption of innocence, predictive policing just really turns that on its head, and it suggests that you can use aspects about a person's life to make these really crucial, sensitive decisions that will impact their liberty. It's another thing like public facial recognition where we as civil society, as
Because are
digital.
there concrete examples where, because it's one thing to send police to somewhere where they think there might be trouble, which is normal if you're trying to keep everybody safe. But are there specific examples of the police with this predictive policing technology putting people in preventive detention?
Well, we are starting to see in around the world actually that these systems are increasingly being used. So several cases in the US, for example, where it has contributed to people having being given a criminal sentence. And whilst we might think that wouldn't happen in the EU, I think the reality is very different. And we only have to look to, for example, the Dutch government to see actually that a lot of governments are experimenting with these kinds of predictive technologies. And I mentioned the Dutch government because that is another one of the red lines that fortunately the European Parliament has taken a strong stance against today. And that's something called social scoring, which has many similarities to predictive policing. Social scoring is a technique that we've seen the Dutch government use to predict whether people were cheating on their benefits, on their welfare provisions. And not only was this based on, again, very discriminatory data, not individual data, but things about where people live, where they come from, proxies for their race, their ethnicity. But it was also completely faulty, as we know these systems are. And in fact, as a result of that Dutch benefits scandal that was known as the Siri case, a lot of people lost their jobs, had their children taken away, died by suicide as a result of the false and slanderous accusations of benefits fraud that had been leveled against them by the use of these social scoring systems. So it's really...
I was just going to say, Ella, as you said at the outset, today marks a first step towards a regulation proper for artificial intelligence. France's president, attending a tech conference here in Paris this Wednesday, was asked about the regulation of AI.
The good thing is that we have a lot of very good talents. We have good mathematicians, good data scientists, a lot of talents adapted to this AI environment. We will invest like crazy on training and research. We want to be sure that this is safe and biased raw material, I would say. And that the language model we have are not biased, and that's what should be forbidden in our society, is forbidden in this model. So we need some rules. We need this basic regulation and much more regulation by design.
We're listening to those words for the first time, as you are, Ella Jakubowska. Your reaction to the tone employed there by the French president?
Well, it's a little bit ambiguous, I think, but in general, pointing to the fact that we do need safe AI is something that we've heard from heads of state across the EU, and that is what has underpinned this move in the EU to come up with the Artificial Intelligence Act. But we didn't always feel in the initial draft that was put forward by the European Commission that that was actually being achieved, and that's why we've fought so hard for several years to say, if we really want safe and trustworthy AI, and we want a European AI market that can be profitable and innovative, the number one thing we need to put at the heart is people's rights, and what is going to be the things that actually improve our lives. We cannot base regulation on false promises, on buzzwords, on unevidenced claims of safety and security. And I think that's something that the European Parliament has really taken to heart in their position. They have drawn these red lines, but they have also set what I would call guidelines for the safe and trustworthy and human-centric uses of AI. And going back to your earlier point, that's something that we haven't seen to the same extent in the position that has come out of the Council, so the grouping of EU member states. And so what we will see over the next few months is the Parliament negotiating with the Council of member states.
And we'll see what comes out of it. Just very briefly, because we're running short on time, we wouldn't be talking about all this if the world hadn't been shocked by the inroads made by ChatGPT. This concept of labeling when you're using things like ChatGPT, is that going to work?
Well, I think it's actually very easy to get dazzled by what we hear about ChatGPT. And actually what the EU has tried to do is focus on the real harms today coming from often seemingly much more simple systems. And so whilst I think there are things that need to be regulated and the EU's AI Act would take some steps towards, for example, transparency against ChatGPT, we need to be wary of some of the claims about human extinction, for example, and to instead focus on very real, tangible harms that we have already seen in Europe and across the world.
Ella Jakubowska of the European Digital Rights Umbrella Group, many thanks for joining us from Brussels.
Thank you.